It's not just accepting the status quo, but pushing for better. Because everyone deserves to move through this world with dignity, respect, and consideration. Hello and welcome to the podcast, to another episode of Queerly Overthinking. I'm your host, Adam Harper. In today's episode, we're going to be diving into something that I feel like is incredibly important, which is how can we create a more inclusive world by focusing on accessibility? We're going to be exploring what it means to recognize the barriers that people with disabilities face, and how can we take actionable steps to ensure that everyone has access to the spaces, both digital and physical, that we all share and enjoy. Stay with me as we unpack this. I'm super hyped for this topic, and with that, let's get started. Now, let's get into why I'm talking about this today. I recently finished reading a book, Upgrade, by Blake Crouch, and it got me thinking so much about the concept of inclusivity, empathy, and kind of how it all bundles together in a way. One of the more important things that I feel like threads us together as humanity. I feel that if we focused a lot more on being empathetic, being inclusive, being mindful, our world would totally be a different place. And that's the thing, in our own little worlds, our communities, our spaces, the people that we interact with, our social circles, I feel like that's where we can start to build a more inclusive space and see where that takes us. But that's not the only thing that's been on my mind recently. As someone who works in experience design, I've been becoming more aware of the importance of accessible design. It's about more than just following best practices. It's about making sure everyone, regardless of ability, can fully engage in the spaces that we create. This recent journey for me of understanding and implementing accessibility into my work has genuinely opened my eyes, and it's something I've become so passionate about and hope to bring to this conversation today. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to break things out into two main segments. The first is really going to be talking about recognizing the need for inclusivity and accessibility. And then the second segment, we're going to be talking about taking action and building inclusive spaces. To start off, let's think about where being inclusive and empathetic fit into the conversation of accessibility. I think you're going to probably hear these words, like these three words, a lot, so bear with me. To me, I feel like it starts with recognizing that we all navigate the world differently. And for some, the barriers to navigate are more significant. Whether it's physical space around us or the digital spaces we interact with, the reality is that not everyone has the same access, or there are more hoops to jump through to gain access. If we think about something as simple as navigating a website, what if that website wasn't designed with your needs in mind? What if the text was too small to read, the buttons too tiny to press, or the content impossible to understand without subtitles or alternative text? This is where I feel empathy begins, with recognizing these specific barriers and understanding that they do exist, even if we personally don't encounter them every day. Now let's talk about those everyday things that able-bodied individuals might take for granted. I've been following some incredible TikTok creators and have really listened to their experiences, which have opened my eyes personally about things that, again, I take for granted. One of the stories that was shared was for someone who is in a wheelchair, basic amenities like access to a toilet or getting in and out of a shower can be huge obstacles if not provided the ability or the equipment to be able to do so. Another is a story of a person who is blind and deaf, and just requesting a menu in a restaurant can be a challenge, especially if they're met with resistance or dismissal. Now, these challenges might seem small or even invisible to those who don't face them, but they're real and they're significant. And I could really feel through the content that they were sharing, the video that they were sharing, just a small glimpse of the frustration that they have to work through daily. This is where I feel, again, empathy and consideration are one one of the first few steps towards fostering inclusive spaces. There's this concept that really struck me. Ableism isn't just about physical barriers. It's also about the pace and the expectations we set in society. One TikTok creator mentioned that being fast is being ableist. And that really struck a chord with me, if I'm being honest. We live in a world that often values speed over empathy and efficiency over inclusivity. But if we slowed down and considered how our actions or inactions can affect others, we could start dismantling some of these barriers. I would say being considerate in this context means questioning the norms that we've accepted as just the way things are and considering how they impact those around us. Okay, now that we've talked about recognizing the need for inclusive spaces with a focus again on accessibility, let's move on to the second segment here of how can we actually build it into our lives, into the spaces that we cultivate and create, and even in the way that we interact with others. As a designer, I am deeply invested in making digital spaces accessible. It's not just about ticking the boxes. It's about creating environments where everyone can engage fully. I previously mentioned earlier about hurdles that someone might experience when interacting with the digital space. So for me, these are some of like the first steps of just like, this is non-negotiable of, I want to be more aware of including this on digital spaces that I create. Things like text contrast and legibility, alternative text for images to make sure that websites can work with screen readers and aren't just visual but functional for everyone. These are just a handful, but by considering these aspects from the very beginning of a project, we're not just following guidelines, we're practicing inclusivity. We're saying, I see you, and I want you to be a part of this experience. But again, shifting gears, accessibility is not limited to the digital world. Recently, I've really had my understanding broaden, thinking more about physical spaces, places that people live, work, play, travel, experience things in the real world. And it's got me thinking, how can we, even if, we're not architects or builders, advocate for spaces that are welcoming to everyone? The first thing that came to mind was supporting legislation for better accessibility standards, or even giving direct feedback to a business about making their spaces more inclusive. One thing that I find really interesting that I always love being able to share with people is I'm sure you've seen, if you haven't already, like doorknobs that are round versus doorknobs that are like levers in a way where you like put your hand on it and push down or you pull up on it. That is a really quick way to share with people like how that is more accessible of a design than a round doorknob. Granted, door design and making sure that it's accessible for people who aren't able to grab a handle and move it, or someone who's in a wheelchair and who needs the door to open automatically. Obviously there's a lot of other things to consider, but that right there just is one example of how a physical space can become more accessible. Because I'm sure there are people who have been carrying too many things and are not able to open the door by like twisting a knob, but are able to like use their elbow or lean on the handle to push down so that way it opens the door. I know I have many a time. With all that in mind, the word that stands out to me again is consideration here. It's not just accepting the status quo, but pushing for better, because everyone deserves to move through this world with dignity, respect, and consideration. Lastly, one other thing that came to mind was showing up as an ally. I'm part of the LGBT community, if you hadn't known. And I just know how much it means to me when other people stand up for my rights and for my ability to be included. And the same goes for the disability community. This isn't Ally 101, but what I know for me personally being an ally means, to me at least, is listening. recognizing that you're in a space where, whether you're a part of this community or not, that I want to be here to learn and to hear from others. So that way I can then hopefully in turn be a better advocate to help amplify the voices of this community. To me, it's about solidarity in that understanding. And while our experiences might be different, the commitment to equity and inclusion is broadly shared. So y'all, with all this in mind, and to kind of wrap things up, I just want to reiterate that being inclusive, being empathetic, all of this in mind with a focus on accessibility. This isn't just a single action or single thought. It's something that we can build into our interactions, our designs, our work, and our daily lives. And what's interesting is that as I've started to really put this at the forefront of my mind, the more I've begun to practice it day in and day out, it's really becoming second nature to me when I start a design or a project or an interaction or just engaging with somebody. How does that phrase go? Not practice makes perfect, but practice makes progress. I just want to encourage you to take a moment today, whether it's in your own personal life, in your digital space, physical space, in a conversation you're having, ask yourself, how can I make this more inclusive? How can I show more empathy and consideration? I want to leave you with some thoughts from Haben Gurman. They are one of the TikTok creators that I've begun to follow. They are deafblind, and I found this article from an interview that they did with Forbes. It's a little bit extended, but it's so good, and I just had to share it with you. From the article, it says, "My favorite argument," expressed Haben, "is that disability sparks innovation. A topic she explores in her article, People with Disabilities Drive Innovation, published in the Financial Times. She continues by saying, when you invest in a disability challenge, you could end up building a new solution that drives society forward. One example of this she offered is called the curb cut effect, the idea that addressing disadvantages or exclusions experienced by one group of people often ends up benefiting all of society. Haben explained, Berkeley was one of the first cities to install curb cuts. Those are the ramps at the end of sidewalks, going from the sidewalk down to the street, back up to the sidewalk. And when they installed them, people who use wheelchairs gained greater freedom and mobility. Parents pushing strollers benefited from the curb cuts. Travelers with luggage benefited from the curb cuts. Kids with skateboards loved the curb cuts. In 2023, autonomous delivery robots benefit from the curb cuts. I doubt in the 60s and 70s that cities thought robots would be using curb cuts to deliver medicine and groceries. But when you design for accessibility, you literally pave the way for better innovation for the entire community. Absolutely inspiring. I have loved being able to follow their experiences and their journey. I truly am just so excited to be able to learn and to really just better understand how can I support, how can I engage, how can I be an advocate for this community. And on that note, y'all, thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. This episode really means a lot to me because it's something that has truly lit a fire under me. I really feel so passionate about this, and I want to continue to learn and continue to see where I can make an impact. And let's keep the conversation going, because the more that we talk about it, the more that we can make a difference. And if you found this conversation meaningful, I would love it if you shared it with someone who you feel like would also enjoy it. And remember, episodes come out every 2 weeks, so be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you get notified when new episodes drop. But until then, I hope you have an amazing day, and I will talk to y'all soon. Queerly Overthinking is hosted, edited, and executive produced by Adam Harper, with additional producing by Cass Cooper. You can follow Queerly Overthinking on Instagram or TikTok at Queerly Overthinking, and you can find more at www.queerlyoverthinking.com.